everyone, it's Lisa. Welcome back to my channel. Before we get started on this video tutorial, go ahead and click that subscribe button and click that bell button to be notified of future videos from me. I'm going to be showing you how to make this adorable Halloween shadow box using the Halloween Kids for HSN stamp set from the Stamps of Life. And this stamp set will only be available on hsn.com, and it comes with these adorable Halloween stamps. And it also includes the sentiments that you see here, the trick or treat, smell my feet, give me something good to eat, and happy Halloween. It also comes with the matching die set. So I stamped out all 3 images, and it turns out that I ended up only using 2 images. I did not end up using this girl cat stamp, but I stamped them out onto Bristol Smooth cardstock using the Forever Black Stamps of Life ink, and I'm coloring them up with my Zig Clean Color Real Brush pens. These pens are used for watercoloring. I start with the black on the very edge, then I come in with the dark gray color, and then the gray color over that, and then take my blender pen and just blending all those colors to the middle so that the middle is lighter than the edges of that stamp. And I repeat the process all along the entire edge of that cat costume. Now you could also use your Arteza Real Brush pens for this. I did not use my Arteza here because I did not have those pens when I created this card. So I did use the Zig, which both work exactly the same. However, the Arteza does not include the blender pen as you see me using in this video. So in that case, if you were using the Arteza, you can just pick a dark gray color, outline the edges, and use your water brush to bring that color into the middle. So once again, I'm coloring the girl cat, but I don't end up using her in this card, but I wanted to show how I colored her up just in case any of you want to replicate some of this. You can see how I did the coloring. Now for the hair, I'm going to be using the mustard color and also the blender. So I just kind of outline some of the edges and then close the gap with the blender pen. And I do go over that a second time. I always like to go over a second time whether I'm using Copic markers or, as you see here, the water brush pens, just because it makes it a little bit darker and makes that color a little bit deeper. So here I'm going over a second time, same process, and then blending that together with the blender pen. And then for the belt, I am going to be using the deep violet and then come in with the violet color and then the blender. So the deep violet on the edges, then the violet, and then the blender to blend those two. For her skin, I'm using the flesh color, and then I do come in and color up the skeleton, and most of that skeleton is already colored for me, so you can see that the black I don't need to worry about. That's part of the ink and the stamp. So I do add a little bit of gray along some of the edges for his bones, and I am using the light gray color and the blender. And then for the hair, I'm coming in with bright yellow and the blender to blend all of that together. I do like to add a little bit of gray whenever something is white, just to add some shading. So I think that, you know, if you wanted to leave the skeleton white, you could also do that. And then for the mummy, I am not going to color the whole thing, but the parts that I do color, again, I'm using some of the same colors that I colored the other stamps. So the deep violet, I'm also coming in with the lilac and the blender. And every other one of those rectangular areas, I will color purple. And then the other ones I will be using the bright yellow and the blender. So that whole outside part of her head is going to be purple and yellow. And then I will be adding a little bit of light gray to the bandages on the mummy. Now, just in case you're interested in seeing how to use the Real Brush pens, I do have a tutorial on my YouTube channel which shows different coloring techniques with the Arteza Real Brush pens, and I will link that down below. So if you want to watch that, it's more in depth on how to color with Real Brush pens. So here you can see me just adding a little bit of gray tones just to outline some of those bandages. Again, that is with the light gray color. and then just coming in with the blender just to blend that out. It just adds a little bit of shadow on those bandages so that it doesn't look all one flat color white. For the face, I'm also using the flesh color and then sugar almond pink for her mouth. I did die cut them out with the matching dies. And then I'm also coming in and bringing in some other stamp sets. I wanted to include a pumpkin in my shadow box. So I am bringing in the Halloween to Build set, and this is a pumpkin from that set. Again, it's on the Stamps of Life website, and coloring that up. And the orange color that you see for the pumpkin, I colored with orange and bright yellow and the blender. And the purple is the deep violet and the lilac and the blender. And for the black part, it is black and the blender, and also bringing in the ghost using the same light gray color as I did in the mummy. I'm also going to be bringing in this pumpkin that I ended up die cutting with the tangerine cardstock, but I didn't want to have cardstock for my pumpkin. I actually wanted my pumpkin to have the same colored look as the stamps, so I actually die cut the top layer out of my Bristol Smooth cardstock and decided to color up that pumpkin using my Zig markers. So here's the shadow layer. I'm just coloring with the black, and I'm going to glue down the colored image on top of the shadow layer. So here you can see both of those side by side. I ended up going with the one on the left, which is the one that I colored. So I'm going to be making a shadow box. So I am using the 5x7 shadow box die set from the Stamps of Life, and I'm taking that large die and I die cut it with a piece of the licorice cardstock, and then I'm folding it at the score lines. Next, I'm taking another piece of licorice cardstock using that same die, but I need to cut a window out. Now that die comes with two large square dies for the window. One is larger than the other. I chose to use the smaller one for my window. Notice how I'm just layering this square in that die set and then running that through my die cut machine, and it cuts not only the outside frame but also the window, and then just fold it at the score lines. Now I'm ready to glue both of those pieces together to form my shadow box. So you can see how each piece gets layered, and I'm just going to use some glue to put on the panel. So add some glue on that little flap on one of those panels, and then add that top layer directly to the top of that glued piece. Press that down really well and then flip it over and do the same thing. So add your glue to the top of that little flap and then add the back side right on top of that glued flap. And press really well, and now you have your shadow box. Next, I took a piece of watercolored paper and I die cut it out of that same square die that I cut the hole out of the front of the shadow box. And once I've done that, I'm taking a circle die and die cutting a piece of masking paper out of a circle die. I'm going to be creating a Halloween scene on this square watercolor paper, and this masking paper is going to be my moon. So I peeled back the adhesive backing of that masking paper and then just adding it to the middle of that square, putting a piece of tape on the back of that to hold it down, and I'm going to be doing some ink blending. I'm going to be using my Midnight, my Grape, and my Raspberry inks from the Stamps of Life. So I'm using my blending tool just to come around the edges of that square with my darkest color, which is my Midnight ink. I'm going to end up coming in later on with the licorice, which is the black ink, just to add a little bit of black to that to make it a little bit darker. But for now, I'm starting with the Midnight, and then I'm coming in with the Grape. And after I do the Grape, I will come in with the Raspberry. And the reason that I have the masking paper over top of the center of that paper is because I don't want to get any ink underneath that circle, because that is going to be my moon. And I want the moon to be bright white. So when I release this masking paper, I'm going to have a large white circle around or right in the center of that square. And that square is actually going to be attached to the back side of my shadow box. So here I decide to bring in some of the licorice, and I just add it right around the edges so that it gives it a little darker look. I wanted that darker look for the Halloween scene. And then I'm just coming in with my Grape and just blending that out. And you can continue to add color to darken it up and blend out with your other colors just to add more vibrancy to your background. I bring in some white acrylic paint and I squeeze it onto my glass mat. I use a paintbrush to flick it on to the background. And as I do that, I realize it's a little bit too thick than the look I was going for. So I take my spray bottle and just spray that paint with water and just mix it up to thin it out. And then I splatter it on with my paintbrush. So just dip my paintbrush into some of that and splatter it on or flick it on to that background. And after I've done that, I will take my heat tool and dry that paint because I know I'm going to be working with it right away, so I wanted it to be dry. I do spray a little bit of water onto the background after I've dried that paint, and then I take my paper towel and I just put it on top and soak up some of that water and then just dry it again. It just adds another layer of texture to that background. Once I peel back that masking paper, you can see the bright moon, and I do flick some more paint on that because I wanted some paint to appear on the moon as well. Dried that up again, and now I'm ready to adhere that to the back of my shadow box card. So I just add some glue and then stick it right in that shadow box and press it down right on the background. The shadow box die comes with this hillside die, which I die cut 2 times out of the licorice cardstock. And I am going to turn one of them over so that I have the larger hill on the left on one side and then the larger hill on the right on the other. So I just wanted to add some dimension there when I add these to my shadow box. I am adding some powdered sugar ink to the top of those hillside borders because I wanted it to look like the moon was reflecting light off on top of that hill. I did get some ink at the bottom, so I just end up just putting a little bit of ink all over the whole thing. I had ink on my fingers and that's what happens. It ends up getting all over the cardstock. So I do that for both of them, add some ink, and I go ahead and score at those score lines on the edges. Those flaps on the edges are where you're going to have your glue. So you put your glue on the outside flap and that's going to be attached to the walls of your shadow box. So I'm going to have one towards the back and then I'm going to have one right in front of that. So I just press down with my finger to adhere that glue to the wall of the shadow box. And I did put the one in the back that had the ink all over the bottom because you're not even going to end up seeing that once the border in the front is there. You're not even going to end up seeing that mess up one in the back. So then I add the second one, making sure that the edge of that flap is flat against the hillside border in the back, and then just press those against the wall of the shadow box. Next, I took a piece of the licorice cardstock and I die cut it out of a stitched rectangle die. I'm going to do some embossing, so I do add some powder over top of that so that the embossing powder does not stick where I don't want it to. And I stamped up the trick or treat with my Versamark ink and adding some white embossing powder to the top of that. I will be using my heat tool to melt that embossing, and that will be my sentiment that's going to go on my shadow box. So now I'm ready to add my stamps and my sentiment to my shadow box. I went ahead and glued in the little skeleton guy. I'm also bringing a pumpkin that I got from the Goodies for Wheelbarrow set from the Stamps of Life. Now when you add your images to your shadow box, you have to make sure that you're not gluing the entire back of the image because only part of that image is going to be adhered as you see here. So on this mummy, I only put glue from like the waist down because that's all that's going to be adhered, and it's going to be adhered to those hillside borders. So here you can see I'm just adding glue to the bottom of that pumpkin with the hat and then adding that there in front next to that mummy. Now I really like the way that this card is turning out. I'm thinking that I probably should have made that moon a little bit smaller because I'm feeling like these images are so large that they're taking up a lot of the shadow box, which is fine. I just think they're taking away from some of the background that I created. And I really, really love that background that I created. So I think if I would have made that moon a little bit smaller, you would have been able to see more of the background through those stamped images. But these stamped images are very large stamps, and they fit so nice within this shadow box. So here you see me just adding the pumpkin. This is going to be in the mummy's hand, like a little trick or treat box. And you see that I added the sentiment on top, and that's going to complete that shadow box. Now this shadow box will fold flat for mailing, but it might need to go in a larger envelope because that ghost and that trick-or-treat sentiment kind of extend beyond the top edge of that shadow box. So that's also something that you need to consider when you are adding elements to your shadow box. So I really love how this turned out. If you like these Halloween stamps, you can hop on over to the HSN website, do a search for the Stamps of Life, and search for the Halloween Kids. And be sure to subscribe for more card making inspiration. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.